Okay, so let me share this epic in the chat for all of you to review. It's called Release Notes, and I've broken it up into several sub-epics. And generally, I would say that all of these features are going to be dog-fooded internally, but we have this releases page that's populated by the release post today that you built, Nathan. So I'm talking to an expert here. But what's interesting is that our teams are starting to consume that as is. And we need to balance their feedback and kind of think about how can we improve that page as it exists today until we can get rid of or transition the release post process away from the way it is today. But it's my understanding, and that's why Farnoosh is included in this process, is that we'll have the release post process as we know it today with the YAML file feature MRs that get added separate from the actual instrumentation merge requests. That will be a status quo for a little bit. So after we leave that process, we'll have the in-product feature set that we'll leverage. And that will be what we also need to consider building as a part of this release notes epic. So what I wanted to accomplish in the sync meeting was give a lay of the land on how we're thinking about release notes internally, so that, Nathan, we can make improvements to the existing GitLab page populated from the release post, and then also consider the enhancements that we want to make so that we can replace the release post as it is today and generate the releases page a little bit more automatically. How does that sound? Okay, perfect. And then I wanted to introduce Farnoosh. She'll be shadowing this engineering relationship between you and I and potentially Sean as we start to think about back-end experiences. And she is making enhancements to the product development workflow. So she'll be here to be like, Jackie, you're not following the product development workflow like it's written, and to make enhancements to both me and the product development workflow process, which is a really cool thing for us to be the specimen that gets analyzed in that regard. So I'm half excited, half like petrified. I like constructive criticism, and Farnoosh is incredible at giving it, so I'm ready to receive. So let me share my screen and we can walk through the release notes epic as it's written today to give that landscape that I was talking about earlier. So from a product goal perspective, we want to, in an end state world, so in the future, what we want to help users do is set what source they want their release notes on the releases page to be generated from. So we want this to be flexible and potentially generated from multiple sources. So these kinds of things could be a header inside of an issue or an epic or a merge request, and it gets filtered and pulled into that releases page from labels. So that is like a big picture idea where we eventually want to go. Taking a step back, we have some iteration paths that we need to consider. And I think some of this can get parallelized with other teams in addition to us. But the first one is this idea of auto changelog creation. So currently our delivery team has a very manual way of changing and editing commit messages back into the automated changelog that's created. What we may think about doing is instrumenting semantic release as a part of our CI templates, but also adopting semantic release internally so that we can use semver syntax to pull in those commit messages to reduce some of the scripting burden and maintenance burden that Marin's team is currently maintaining on their delivery side. Another iteration path, which is more about release notes in the enterprise and what GitLab will probably end up consuming and using, are making enhancements to that source of the release notes field. So building in the capabilities to pull release notes from an issue, pulling the title of a merge request or an epic. And what we need to also prioritize are thinking about the existing releases page. and how can we make that more usable and replace the marketing website as we know it. Does that all make sense? Okay. So we have some checkboxes down here that are about the requirements of both the end state, which is the fancy select your source and auto-generate release notes from this based on labels. And then we have the requirements that are currently being satisfied by, these requirements are currently being satisfied by our existing release post. So this is kind of like the continuity of dogfooding that we need to think about as we go. And some of these features are currently in your releases page today, Nathan. Like it links to the documentation. We have a link to the existing marketing blog post. You can provide quick access to the tier. So those kinds of feature sets have to be maintained in our final solution. There's a couple of enhancements around highlighting upcoming releases. So this is where the idea of a draft release becomes more relevant. And we've talked a little bit about that in our release management syncs. But this epic here will be creating a release so that somebody who is looking forward to 13.4 can see what are all the issues scheduled for that milestone as a salesperson, and potentially draft release notes from those features as kind of like a published state. So we can think about how we want to intersect release notes and draft releases together. In my mind, the MVC is that we just create the object of a future release, don't have a tag to it, and then once the tag's associated to it, that's when we populate the release notes. But there will eventually be like a future state where people kind of want to see the release notes before it's the version cut. But we can deal with that when we get there. Other requirements are the searchability of release notes, which is something that we're weighing in the next milestone, where we've already weighed, but we'll prioritize it in the next milestone for delivery in like 13.6 or so. So this will be existing release notes, and that search will eventually be expanded so that we can, filter it on labels and that kind of thing. From a structure standpoint, I've discussed auto changelogs already, adding semantic release, which is a part of the auto changelog story, adding epics as sources, adding issues as sources. I've left out merge requests for now, but we may create an epic for a merge request and track the merge request activities in there. And then of course, more fine-tune, kind of like release notes are confusing, so we should probably remove them from tags. That kind of stuff is also in this epic. This adding issues as the source for release notes on release tags. This has some dogfooding enhancements of your existing page today in it, Nathan. So what I wanted to discuss with you is how do we want to plan capacity for the upcoming milestones so that these get scheduled, and if I should just prioritize them alongside the original, like the other scope that we have, and then we just ship it like that, or if we feel like we can keep this kind of on the board and you pick it up after we ship other features. Just wanted to have that open, transparent dialogue so that we're not overloading work for you. And these may be features that we need Sean for too. So I'm open to also just planning in our milestone that you and Sean are going to be like at reduced capacity so we can support this dogfooding effort more thoroughly, which is I'm completely comfortable with. That just means instead of planning a wait of 10 issues as deliverable, 10 wait hours as a deliverable, that we only plan maybe 5 as deliverable. And that way we're able to be more dedicated to the releases enhancements page. To dive into the first request from Monica, which is our sales representative, they wanted a way to see .com versus self-managed. And I remember from your original instrumentation MR, you mentioned this was a little weird from a historical perspective because they were once in 2 separate repositories. So would love to hear a little bit more of your thoughts on if this is possible or not. And we can, of course, review this asynchronously too.
Yeah, no problem. My first thought, yeah, so the split between the two different repositories was, it used to be, I think if I'm thinking of the right thing, it was the GitLab runner, although the CI was a separate product, and then GitLab itself. That was a super long time ago, so I don't really know if that's really relevant. Like, I can't imagine they would really care because that was so far back in our history. So ever since, like, any kind of modern feature will have been developed in that mono repo. So I don't see there being a big issue there if I'm thinking of the right thing.
Perfect. That sounds good. And I will, I'll pull up your initial MR after this meeting and kind of link it back to all of this stuff so that we can access everything in one place.
So one question about this: what is, when they're saying they're trying to distinguish which features are available versus SaaS versus self-managed? Are there, like, I don't know which features they like. Pretty much they're on parity. Like if you self-host, you have all the features that you would if you were on GitLab.com.
So like
Unless
some admin features or instance level features that might be in the release post might only be on self-managed, and like enablement and omnibus might have features that aren't going to be inside of GitLab.com in the same way. So here's what we see today. This is all representing exactly what the release post says. But if we go to actually, I can just link from your page. What am I doing? If we go here, we have these little badges that tell us what tier they're in, but also if they're in .com or SaaS.
Okay. Is there ever a time when they're not? One's in SaaS and not the other one? I guess maybe like, oh, I get, now there's one. Okay. Yeah, okay. So that's almost just kind of things that are pre-configured on .com. Got it. Okay. Do they want the ability to
see that?
have to like kind of two different views of that?
Or just an indication that both of these features are available on this page in .com or self-managed. Because right now we only see the ultimate and premium and core starter tiers. We don't see gold, silver, and free. So maybe that's just what we're adding, is if it's ultimate and gold, maybe like under here, if it's ultimate, also have a gold tag that shows that it's in gold. And if it doesn't have that tag, then that means it's only available in .com. But then there might be a weird case where there's only gold features that aren't on .com, like Gitaly, the Gitaly cluster that we just saw.
Yeah, I'll have to dive into that a little further to understand like how those differences are labeled in the release posts, like how they mark them.
That's helpful. So what I can do though is add a note to our issue, kind of explaining that and taking a screen grab of the release post so that you know what we're talking about here. Okay. And the second enhancement for Dogfooding is adding a count by new feature and tier. So what they're wanting to see on the releases page is like a count of how many features are in Ultimate, like a little counter. And they also kind of have this ask of like, these are 8 new ultimate features of 485 existing ultimate features. I don't know if
Got
it's
it.
really 485, but they want like here's the new ones and here's the total.
So if we would add something like this, would we also, are they wanting it on that page you were just on, or are they wanting it more on our current public releases page?
This page.
Okay. So we can kind of ignore the other one, like we don't have to maintain parity.
Right.
Nice.
I'll keep Eric Schurter, though, involved so that he can say, oh, well, we could repurpose this and maintain continuity if he wants to, but we'll focus on just building out the beauty of this page so that we can eventually just stamp out the marketing page.
Sure.
Okay. So, Nathan, what I'll do is put a release P2 label on these issues because I don't know what else you have in queue for 13.4, but I would love for these to get shipped as a part of 13.5. So if we can get them weighted and kind of thought through, that'd be awesome.
Sure thing.
So I'll add them to our needs weight issue and we'll get them triaged through our normal process.
Great.
Nathan, if you can ping me also after you have a look at the release page, to also have an idea of how these changes are going to look like. The only thing I'm worried about is how messy this page can be. So if we can collaborate there to try to clean up the UI a little bit, that'll be awesome.
Sure. Yeah.
And then for Farnoosh's benefit, we do mostly everything async. So the best way to keep apprised will be to follow these issues and just ping me or at nfriend for an update, or if you're looking for anything. We don't have a lot of synchronous meetings, and by a lot, we virtually have 0 synchronous meetings that are about existing, functionality that we're building.
That sounds great, because we're completely connected between my goals and requirements for our release post process and now this epic. I think we're very, very much async streamlined in that respect. And I will make sure, I think to keep things simple, I will probably, anytime I think I'm participating in any activity that's relevant, I'll probably ping you, Jackie, so that you can manage the communication rather than me pinging the team when it may or may not be relevant. I'm really excited about this. I think it's gonna kick butt in a good way. And I think there's 2 bits of information I just wanted to share with you that I think will be helpful. Jackie is absolutely right. I think from the standpoint of change and culture management, we will keep the release post blog page up and running, probably in tandem for a while as we dog food and feel our release features at a place where I can strongly go in and say we need to flip the switch, right? In partnership with marketing, sales, and so on and so forth. That is totally true. Eric Schurter's in the loop, and we're basically, Jackie and I are very much in comms to make sure any optimizations I'm making to that release post process is in sync with our goals here, right? However, a bit of exciting news in 2 separate meetings this week with leadership, including Sid. We are getting the clear charge that we need to be focused on optimization and enhancement of existing features and not just shipping features anymore. This is really great news for us at scale to be getting that kind of push from our CEO, from Sid. And some of the simple struggles, such as, man, there's such an attachment to this release post page with endless scroll of like 100+ features shipped, they might resolve themselves and become a smoother path for us to be like, hey, we're going to cut this down by marketing, let them focus it on an intro and start dog fooding sooner, our own release feature. So I just wanted to share that because I think it's exciting, it's relevant, and it's timely, and things are starting to kind of galvanize from that perspective. I'm excited.
And then Sean will be your partner on the back end side, Nathan. So if we need to pull him in, he'll be the person that we're assuming his capacity will take a hit.
That was great.
Perfect. Any other questions or thoughts? What are your impressions? What do you think?
So those, if I kind of understand right, just to make sure I'm understanding the whole scheme. So the very first things we're biting off are just kind of changing the format, changing the details in those release notes. But then the long-term vision is to actually build something into the product that generates these release notes from merge requests and issues, and then hopefully use that ourselves.
Exactly. So that we replace the content creation with the current process that we have and just contain it in the issue.
Sounds great.
Yeah, I know, doesn't it?
Cannot wait to make it beautiful. Yeah.
The one comment I did have, I know we had talked about using semantic release internally, and I think we had talked about that in the previous meeting. I thought about that since that meeting, and I don't know if that would be of benefit to us as an organization, because our versions are very much controlled. They're much more like marketing and monthly driven. They're not really driven by what features are in there. So it's not like we just release a minor version whenever there's a new feature. It's every month there's a minor version. So semantic release is much more about driving the version number off of the changes. So that may make less sense than when we talked about it initially. That was my only comment on that.
That's a good thought, because I did talk to Marin about it, and his initial inclination is that he would rather source the changelog from merge request titles, and then our marketing release notes from issues or epics where product and marketing are. So that was his also gut feel, is that we could generate changelogs for more curated sense versus commit messages.
Yeah, and I don't even know if it's necessarily about with the source of the release notes. I'm just more thinking like with semantic release, normally you say, you have a little tag that says what kind of changes it, and then that changes the version number. So we probably don't want that intense of a relationship that our version number of GitLab is determined by developers.
Incrementing with the commit, the feature commit, with the feat.
That works well for like really small projects, but probably not for something as big as us. So that portion I don't think would make sense for us.
That makes I get what you're saying. That makes a lot of sense. I would say we could adopt it in like release CLI or in pages potentially. But probably not.
And like we've had good success with it in GitLab UI, but that's because we're not like releasing that publicly. We don't like announce that to sales or anything. So we just consume that internally. So
that's a really great call out. You're so good. You're very observant, and you know your audience. I like that about you. So I did want to dive a little bit more into the thinking big aspect of sourcing from different areas. I think we need to build it as flexible as possible so that people can say, yeah, I want to pool this information from any place that I want inside of GitLab, whether that's a merge request title, a header inside of an issue, a header inside of an epic. So I could see this getting really complex, but from an experience standpoint, from a configuration standpoint, where do you think makes sense for users to set this up? And what do you think we'd be asking of users to adopt this kind of a feature?
My initial thought is that it'd be great to, since we already have this release syntax in our GitLab CI YAML that we've just released, it'd be great to kind of extend that and say, I haven't really looked at it too carefully. I'm assuming we have some kind of release notes property or something you can just type, set it to a variable. But maybe in that, there could be some sub-properties there that you can configure it to point to merge requests titles, or somehow we specify the target inside that GitLab CI YAML. That'd be my initial thought, is that that way it's all generated from that YAML file.
That's what I'm thinking too. That's where it'll be the most flexible. I am worried about any backward changes and the maintainers getting a little anxious about implementing a change like that inside of the YAML file, because every time we do add a new attribute, they're like, okay, well, this could make things slower, right? Because then the system is having to parse through all of those messages and inject that, which the release CLI should be able to handle. It's not Rails doing that work. So what we've built should be able to service that need. But I think it's easier to fail fast in the UI with those kinds of features, because the YAML file has such a strong maintenance cycle on it. Like, it's taken us 9 months to deliver release generation from the YAML file. This was my first feature that I was on when I joined, and we finally shipped it. So it's definitely in the same thing with assets. You know, assets we started working on shortly thereafter, and we'll finally ship it in 13.6. So any changes that we make to extending the YAML file go through a really strong review process, which is good,
Right.
but it's also like means we need to start those conversations now if we're wanting to source it that way. And then my second thought is accessibility. If we were to think about a system admin from a release management standpoint being the delegate authority to set this at the instance level, like I want to generate release notes from epics issues and merge requests, they would have to have that in each project in each YAML file.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm trying to think. This is kind of similar conversation we had with deploy freezes. Was like, how much do we put in the YAML file versus how much do we put kind of in the, like, in a settings page somewhere. And I think we kind of ended up in a nice way where you just in your YAML file, you say, use deploy freezes, and then you configure them in the UI. So maybe it's something like that.
I like that. Like set source, and yeah, I love that. Like,
yeah,
if you enable set source variable, then you have to set source inside of the panel. That's a really
yeah. And then in the UI, you can go and configure all your rules about how to select what your change log.
And your syntax can be like, yeah, look for these headers and these issues and these projects, or only look for these labels. Like, you can create your hierarchy there. It's a good idea.
This is good because you're also going to allow users to learn like this configuration pattern with releases. So if they configure deploy freezes in a way, they should expect to be able to manage everything else, let's say, in the same flow. So that's also cool.
Create your anchor in the YAML file and then configure it in the UI. Do it.
You're all happy.
I know, I love it. And
the other advantage of that too is that you can configure stuff at the group level. And we can have the group level settings kind of go down to everything. So
cascade
that's
down.
great.
Yeah, that's really good. I like that. I'll add an issue for that right now. Okay, what was my other thoughts that I needed your brain power on while I have you? From a lengthy releases page perspective, I have a lot of anxiety about this, because as we start to get more requests, people may want to jam things like the actual release content block onto the releases page. And that could be like a 200 character blurb at each of these line items. And one of the complaints we have about our existing blog is that it's too long. So I wanted to talk about like interactions of being able to set collapses, or maybe adding like a hover option where like you can add a helper text for each item added that allows you to hover to then read the content. But I don't really like hover interactions in GitLab. My least favorite one is the comment pop-up, because it pops up and it stays wherever it follows me. So I don't want to experience that same like hover over interaction problem, but I would love to brainstorm on how do we avoid lengthy releases? How do we keep the simplicity and beauty and searchability that your current feature has, Nathan? Because that's what sales loves about it. They love going to it, and they were demoing it to customers because they're like, look at how easy it is to search and find this kind of stuff. Like, they just pulled up Command F and looked for their features that they're looking for. Like, they love it because it's so accessible. But other people are going to want to go and see, like, at a quick glance what these features actually are. So what are your thoughts? I'll stop talking.
my first thought is that we could do, I think we've talked about this before, but is making the main releases page different than the individual release page. So maybe the main releases page just shows like the first paragraph of content, and then to see the whole thing, you have to click into it. That could be, that doesn't really, on the individual release page, you'd still have that massive block, but maybe that's okay because it's, you're only looking for that one release.
Yeah.
That's my, I guess, my first thought.
Yeah, that was also my first thought, as in we can make, I don't know, do some separation in the release notes where you just add like the highlights of what this release is about if you still want to show something. But then the content, since we know how long a release item is, and it's so difficult to have 20 items in a single page. And then we can definitely go crazy with the interactions. I know that we have some components in pajamas. It's like the popover, but not a popover per se. It's like a special one where you have, you can add images, you can add everything you want, but then the interaction is a bit different from just the tooltip. It's the one that is clickable, and then you can have more structured content. So we can definitely play around with these elements. But I also like the idea of making a clear separation between the at a glance view and the detail view, so that we can have more freedom.
I have a question that might lead to an idea, if I may. Do we have the anything? I'm not aware on the marketing side, but do we have the concept of anything that would be, that is a collective kind of list of capabilities per like category? Does that make sense? Do we have anything like that today? There.
We do have a page, the features page, no?
Yeah, like that's what I was thinking. Features YAML would be a list of everything that people have added that is of marketing value to the organization. So as a product manager, when I add my release post, I add a features YAML if the feature is sellable or I haven't already added it as a part of the first iteration.
Yeah. I'm just, I was just thinking about the idea of a detailed view being somewhat specific if it's helpful to a user, to a category, but that might not be a great idea. That might cause more clutter in the ecosystem is what I mean, you know?
So there's two worlds when we're looking at the release page. There's people who are going to consume that binary and build on top of it. So it's a distribution platform. And then there's people who are orchestrating and planning releases from that view. So for example, I want to trigger subsequent events for when that release has been added to that page. So they use the releases API to act as a webhook almost to trigger other events. So when we look at release notes, this is a little bit of the distribution part of the releases page. And we have to think about how our customers are using that page and what they're going to want to do with it as a distribution platform for both inner sourcing, air gap use cases, but also like the normal, I am a provider of software, here you go to download this. On a version dependencies use case, we are distributing like packages. So the release notes, again, need to be more consumable in a way that people are like, yeah, these are the changes that are different from the previous release, so I know like what I'm downloading. I'm a little worried about if we accommodate too much of like the GitLab jargon into the releases page in the future, right? Like if we build this off of the features YAML, that won't be usable for, you know, customers in the same way. But if we can populate things from existing archetypes that we have inside of GitLab, like issues, epics, MRs, whatever, that makes it flexible but still configurable enough for the end user's use case. Okay, so to recap, I'm going to create an issue on adding a configuration for release notes in the YAML file to support our idea of emulating the deploy freezes pattern. Question about settings. Do we want to add like a release settings option in the side panel? Because we have deploy freezes, we'll have this. Or do we just expand the existing settings?
You mean at the existing settings at the project level, or you're already talking about the group?
It'll be the group.
Right now it's in settings CI/CD. Is that? Yeah, it might make sense to add a whole nother release section. It depends. I guess maybe that's more of a UX question.
Yeah, I'm looking here at
just,
the. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I didn't have anything else.
No, I'm just looking here how it is right now. So it's the same at the group level. I would say if we make a change in the project level, it may be interesting to do the same at the group so that people know where to configure it, right? The same way. To me, it's interesting to have the releases section there in settings since we're expanding it. But just so, yeah, that we go with the one direction in both levels.
Right now it is CI/CD, like the CD part kind of. So I don't know if we'd split it into CI/CD. And I don't know that in a lot of people's heads, there's a hard line between those two. So we don't want to make it too hidden to where these settings are, but.
Yeah, we don't want to increase friction for that at all. So I'm of the mind that as our first MVC, as we get down this path, it should be just, we put it where deploy freezes settings are so that people go to one place to manage their settings. And then we can explore, I know that the operations team is exploring adding releases as its own side panel option. How exciting is that? And then maybe that's where we can add settings under the releases side panel option and go from there.
Yeah. And especially that at the group level and CIC, there's like 3 options. So it wouldn't really make anyone's life difficult, like to find the releases configuration. So that's also cool.
I know we had talked about too someday doing like if we did add some filtering and searching to that releases page, we'd have a default search or default filters. So that could go there too.
Yeah, you're right. You're totally right. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, I like that. The other issue that I think I need to create is about adding this to the settings option in the front end. Okay, and then of course building out the APIs to configure it, right?
Are you talking about the changelog, release changelog?
Yeah, the source. Like,
yeah.
We obviously will need to like, even though we have this in the YAML file, like we'll need to figure out a way to actually pull, whatever script there.
Yep.
Okay, that works.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways we could do that. It'll be interesting to see how we come up with that. I can think of like 15 different ways. So
I can too. And I've been playing with like how other companies have thought about this, and everyone's super lazy. Like they all are relying on changelog or they're pushing it to the end user. So I feel like this is a real problem that if we solve, like we could be super compelling for people who are orchestrating across hundreds of projects right now. It'll be great. I'm excited about this. Is it hot, Hayana?
It's almost 9 p.m. and I'm sweating here. Everyone watching this video later on, don't come to that in the summer.
Release notes, just can't take it. Awesome. Well, I'll give you back some time unless if there's any other topics that you want to talk about, I can stop the recording and we can use this time for something else.